Hello, and welcome to the Scott Mize Show, a podcast focused on health, diet, bodybuilding, and philosophy. I interview experts, doctors, coaches, and N=1 case studies to answer your questions about improving health, achieving your best physique, and making sustainable progress. We'll cover topics from carnivore and ketogenic diets to bodybuilding to life philosophy and everything in between. Enjoy the show. This episode is brought to you by LMNT Electrolytes. This month, we're switching it up with an exclusive offer that's only for VIP LMNT partners, including Carnivore Cast listeners. You can now receive this free sample pack along with any regular purchase when you use my custom link, which is provided in the show notes or my Instagram link in bio. That's drinklmnt.com/carnivorecast, all one word. And as I said, I'll include the link in the show notes. LMNT Electrolytes are convenient, evidence-based, and delicious, and get yours today to help support the show. Thank you. This is a quick disclaimer before we start the show. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said here should be taken as medical advice, and please consult with your physician before making any changes to your diet, exercise regime, or medications. Thank you, and on to the show.
Robin Strand is an IFBB Pro Bodybuilder from Canada. He also holds a BSc in Kinesiology. He's an online coach and trainer at Pure Muscle and Fitness in Toronto. And Robin also hosts the amazing Canadian Beef podcast on YouTube with amazing guests like Kurt Havens and several IFBB pros. Welcome to the show, Robin.
That was an awesome introduction. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I always try to get a nice intro for guests to hype them up a little bit to start on a good note. So when did you start bodybuilding, Robin, and why did you start?
Yeah, so I did my first competition when I was 17 years old.
Wow.
But I started lifting weights when I was 16. The reason why I started lifting weights initially was, it really was because, longer story, I was bulimic, and then I had a very weak body to the point where a bully took advantage of that and ended up breaking my arm in an arm wrestling match during school in a math class. At the back of the class, we were just arm wrestling and messing around. And, you know, when you put that much force on, you know, the tendon and the structures that are not, you know, nourished in order to handle that, sometimes they just let go. So my arm literally snapped in the middle of the class. And it snapped in my head too. It was just one of those things where I was like, oh my God, like what's happening to me? And I really wanted to take back control over not only just my body, but my mind too, because I realized that, you know, I had kind of, you know, done that damage to myself, really. So I started bodybuilding because I wanted to, basically I cut that cast off and I wanted to get those arms stronger. That was the main priority right away. So, you know, obviously I went to go find some dumbbells, and I went to Walmart and I picked up a $100 dumbbell set. I just started training in my room. And I trained in my room, and I added pieces to my gym, my home gym in my room, which my mom thought I was absolutely crazy because I was doing deadlifts on her carpeted floor. And, you know, I basically actually took out my entire actual room itself. Like I had removed my bed frame in order to fit the squat rack in there and all that craziness. So I just converted my entire room into a gym so I could train there. And it was just like, that was my main focus for about a full year, until I had actually moved in grade 12 to Scarborough. I was living up north here in Toronto. There's kind of like a more northern part where you're living on the lake, and it's beautiful up there. But I ended up moving in grade 12 down to the city to live with my father. And I had met a friend there who was getting ready for a bodybuilding show. And that's how I got into the sport, because he had said, hey, listen, there's this show, and they're going to be giving out $500 to all the first place winners. And I thought, okay, well, you know, I've already been like working really hard at this thing. And by the way, I had the Arnold Encyclopedia, the Arnold Schwarzenegger Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, which was given to me by my boss at the time. When I was 16 years old, my first job was at a restaurant called the Cook Shop and Marketplace. And I worked there for a few months, and then it shut down. So I showed up to work one day, 6 a.m., ready to peel some potatoes, and couldn't get in. And there was a notice on the door. And a couple of weeks later, a Wimpy's Diner opened up there. And there was these two brothers, Michael and David, And David was the younger brother, but they were both just jacked. And you could tell that these guys were bodybuilders. And they kind of felt bad for me. I could tell that, or maybe not felt bad for me, but they realized that there was something that they could maybe do to help me. They saw this really skinny kid who obviously had a good work ethic, but he didn't know what he was doing, and he wasn't giving himself the right nutrition. So that's the main thing. That Mike was always like just giving me food. And at the time, having eating disorder, bulimia, I didn't even know what I could eat and what I couldn't eat. So that's where the Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding gave me it was like my Bible for a while. And again, so I lived off that for a year. Then when I ended up going to that show, I used bodybuilding.com, the Lane Norton contest prep guide, and I prepped for that show. I ended up winning that show and absolutely just fell in love with the bodybuilding sport in general and competing in that whole aspect, because I never really found another sport besides maybe paintball that I was like super passionate about, competitive wise, right? So, and then knowing, okay, well, I can beat other guys at this. So it gave me the confidence to continue and do another show, which again, like always thinking like, how can I, because I'm just obsessed about things and I've always been like that. So that's how I took this. It was like, okay, now I got to hire a full-time coach and trainer. So I begged my dad to give me like a $10,000 loan so I could get a Good Life trainer for the year. And then I prepped for basically that full year with Vincent Walters from Good Life in Scarborough. And he was amazing, like one of the best people I ever could have had at the time to guide me, because he not only did he train me at the gym, but he helped me with my diet, just like any old coach would. But at the time, like a lot of coaches didn't actually give people programs like they do now. So it was really cool that he did that, and he didn't charge me for the program. He only just charged me for the gym. Plus, he would invite me over to his condo so we could pose at his condo gym, which it wasn't creepy at all. Trust me. You know, people can take that the wrong way, but this guy was really like, you know, my first mentor. You know, and he would always just he would do things and he would say, you know, do as I say, not as I do, because he knew that he maybe didn't have the ability to. The trajectory wasn't the same, because I ended up actually beating Vince a few years later for an overall to continue on. But that's basically how I got into it, and that's how I was so determined to continue in the sport. It just chain of events, and then just kept it going.
That's awesome. That's really cool that you got into it so young. I'm jealous. I'm 31 and just did my first show and really started getting into the bodybuilding lifestyle during COVID a few years ago.
Yeah. Well, there's pros and cons to that, because the thing is if you start really early and you abuse your body and you don't have the information, you hurt yourself and then, you know, basically kill yourself, then that's no good. That's not going to get you anywhere. There's so many young guys that I started training with and bodybuilding, competing with, and these guys are gone because they've, you know, whether it's genetics, whether they've done it to themselves, you don't know. But, you know, the sooner you start, potentially the sooner you end. So, you know, I think everybody's got their own path, their own journey. I don't think it actually matters what age you start.
Yeah. I feel very fortunate. In some ways, I am in a lot of ways more mature. You know, I'm very fortunate to have a very stable career, a good marriage, great home life. And so I don't have to deal with a lot of the stressors that young bodybuilders have to. And I like to think I make smarter decisions, although I still have my flaws. I still do stupid things all the time. But yeah, that I destroyed my body and made poor choices rowing for 8 years.
Oh yeah, I've trained some rowers.
Yeah,
I've trained some rowers.
yeah. I was a competitive lightweight rower and was actually recruited to university for rowing and rowed there. And man, at least at the time I was doing it, there was no good advice around nutrition, and we were doing some really stupid stuff. So that took a serious toll on my body.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a good point, right? It's like where you start now, as a beginner now, there's all the information you need. There's so many coaches, great coaches, you know. So yeah, there's pros and cons either way. I remember back in the day just following the Arnold Schwarzenegger Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding workouts. It was like twice a day, 6 times a week.
Yeah.
And I was getting like back tweaks nonstop because I just was overtraining, obviously. So
yeah. Works if you're Roman Fritz, but that's about
it. Does work. And it did work at the time. It did work for a little while because I was talking to Juju Mufu about this, and he brought up a funny point about being bulimic, and I was like 125 pounds at my lowest, and that's essentially where I started training from. But then I kind
Wow.
of ballooned up pretty good, even naturally. Like I got myself naturally to about 200 pounds,
That's
um,
amazing.
as like a fluffy natural.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of natural guys, in my opinion, should aspire to get to a bigger weight, even if they're a little bit puffy, because it's like that's what I did, and I got really big doing that. It's just the fact that, like, when you're 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, it's only after 20 is that you actually start to get that more mature look on your physique. So you just have to be like kind of big and round, and
Yeah.
even if you're a little bit fluffy, like, it doesn't really matter, especially as a natural, because then you can just blow up in your 20s, right?
Yeah.
So
You're also the most impatient then too.
exactly. And you got so many hormones too, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
you just got to take advantage of that. But
Yeah.
but then again, it's like, even if you're 30, or even if you were 45, and let's say your testosterone's already going down, well, then you can just do TRT and you're on your way. So
Yeah.
it's, yeah, I think it's more about the mind than anything else, because I get clients that are saying, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this because of my age, and then that's already like a barrier that you've put on yourself.
Yeah.
Whereas you see, not only do you see IFBB pros competing into their 50s, 60s. I have a client who, he's trying to get his pro card at uh, the North Americans in his 70s. There's a possibility for anything to happen at any age nowadays. You just have to
Yeah.
train your body. As long as you're training your body, then you're making improvements, and you can do bodybuilding.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was hypogonadal actually from rowing. And I actually started TRT like four years before I even got into bodybuilding and training seriously.
Oh wow,
So that was interesting.
I didn't
uh,
even know that could happen.
yeah, no, I had 100 nanograms per deciliter total testosterone consistently. And that was tested for a year before I even started TRT.
Oh wow.
And I had bone mineral density 3 Z scores below the mean, like below osteoporosis levels of bone. Uh,
Why is that happening? Just because you're trying to be lighter? And
I think it was a combination of stress. I was working 100 hours a week in management consulting and traveling, and it's a very high stress career. I was, when you're rowing, you're basically training 6 hours a day of
Mhm.
cardio. So not weight training. So that's not great for your hormones. And with lightweight rowing, you're cutting weight very aggressively and not very intelligently. So you hear that some of this crazy stuff that like wrestlers do for weighted sports, and it's like 10 times worse in rowing because there's less knowledge, there's less regulation. It's like the coaches are like, don't ask, don't tell, just make weight and whatever. So it was pretty stupid. So yeah, that wrecked my hormones.
Yeah, I know it can wreck your body too, because I had a couple clients that were doing the Canadian team for rowing, and they always would keep coming back with the SI problems and problems with
Yeah,
their lower back, because
exactly what I
people
had.
don't even think about it. But when you're rowing, you're training only on one side constantly for hours.
Yeah,
So the lats, everything on one side gets super overdeveloped. The Meadows row is a great one, because then you train the other side
yeah,
specifically. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's crazy, man. Yeah,
yeah. One doctor described it to me as you're moving pianos around corners because
yeah.
all the load is going. You're actually lifting with your legs. It's like a deadlift, basically. But all the load is going through your spine, and you're twisting. You're doing it in a fatigued state, a dehydrated state, and you're doing it over and over and over again. So yeah, it's really bad.
Yeah.
Um, you've spoken a lot about bulimia and been very open about it, which I really appreciate. I think eating disorders, particularly in men, aren't spoken about enough, and it's probably a lot more rampant than we even know about in bodybuilding and in fitness. What started that for you, and what helped you to overcome it?
Yeah. Well, I will say, it actually shocked me almost a little bit, because when I put a few posts out about it, I had a lot of other men reach out and tell me that they were struggling right now. And I was like, holy
Yeah,
crap. Like, because I figured I was more uncommon as a man to deal with that. And starting to have that, like, at 16 years old in high school, 15 years old or whatever, was pretty uncommon as far as I knew. Like you said, it was mostly like females that was talked about having these eating disorders. But what really happened, because I've thought about this now, and I can't pinpoint exactly what caused it, but I do recall there was a period of time where when I was like, 13, 14, 15, I had like a group of buddies and we did everything together. And we would always, this is basically just like, psychoanalyzing it, but I had one friend who was basically like, he was, you know, spoiled essentially, and he had, access to all the junk food. And, that kid was fatter than us. And, me kind of being in the middle. And then I had my other two friends who played a lot of soccer and they were very active. One of them was like a BMXer. He was skateboarding. He was just nonstop active. So I had like an array of ectomorph and everything in between all the way to endomorph to kind of what's going on here. And I didn't understand at the time, but I realized that I didn't like the way that I felt moving towards being like a pudgier kind of state. And my friend also had a gym in his basement. I remember we would go there and kind of just being like getting the idea of like, I'm kind of out of shape. And maybe that was kind of what triggered is like, maybe I'm out of shape. That's why I don't do well when I play soccer. Like people don't want to pick me for their team. Like when I do track and field, like as hard as I try, like I don't win anything. Like I just tried everything and I would never feel good. And so I would just be like, oh, it must be because I'm not in shape or I'm something wrong with me. But because there was really no information, I was like maybe just getting on dial-up internet at the time. So I didn't know what the hell was going on. I was just like, oh man, like I got to do something about this. And I related it to me being lean. I was like, oh, if I'm lean and shredded and muscular, then people will like me. And so I started downsizing, and I was probably starting off at like normal 16-year-old 160 pounds. And then I got down to 125 because I would continue just basically I would in the morning I would maybe eat something or maybe just skip breakfast and just go on and lunch. I would just save all my lunch money and use only a $1 to get just a veggie tray, celery and carrots, and I would throw out the dressing and just eat those. And then I would like go home and then I would have dinner with my family. And that was kind of the issue, is that I didn't have any control over what was being served and I would have to eat it. Or else it would be weird. Why aren't you eating? Right. So I'd eat normally, but then it would trigger like, but there was, sugar and butter and whatever the heck was in there. And then that would make me feel like really uncomfortable, that it would be detrimental to my physique or whatever was going on in my mind. That's the eating disorder. But also I was starving. So I wouldn't be able to stop myself from just continuing to eat because I needed to eat because I probably had less than 100 calories all day. And it's like 5 p.m. and, I'm 16 years old. I need to eat. So I would eat a lot of dinner and then I would be overstuffed. And then if there was dessert or something like that, I would continue to eat the dessert because my body needed it, but I was already overstuffed. It would be too uncomfortable. I would have to go and just take a shower so I could purge, just self-induced vomiting.
Yeah.
And then I would, just clean everything up. And then I would go afterwards to the track down by my school. And I would just at night, to make sure nobody was watching me, then I would run the track for like 2 hours.
That's crazy. And what got you out of that cycle? Because I imagine it can like feed off itself and become addicting mentally in its own way.
Well, it was the bodybuilding that got me out of it initially, because as soon as I had the framework for the bodybuilding encyclopedia, I basically followed the nutrition plan in there. I would say 99% of the time, but I still had like little binges and purges. But I had an idea of what to do. As before, I had no clue about nutrition. I thought anything with calories was bad. So the first kind of steps I was doing was just basically eating protein. So then I would take my protein. So for breakfast, I can't remember exactly what I had for breakfast, but most of the time it was just like an eggs and oats pancake or whey and something like that. But usually oats, eggs, whey, morning, typical. And then for lunch, I'd bring Ezekiel bread, 2 slices with natural peanut butter on it and chicken breast on it. Which sounds weird. And I thought it was weird. And I didn't think anybody would like understand why I was eating that. So that's why I ate it in the bathroom.
Okay.
And And then for dinner, and then I basically just for there, then I started my own kind of meal planning. Like, then I went into, okay, now I'm going to have like regular scheduled meals. I basically just followed whatever was in that book at the time.
Yeah.
And with my own little recipes. And it's funny because I posted that thing about where I started a bulimia yesterday, and it required me to go back onto my photo bucket, which I had uploaded those photos in like 2008. And then I saw the progression. I took pictures of everything I ate for like months. So I was
Wow.
looking through some of that. I was looking through some of that. So I remember everything so clearly because I'm taking pictures of everything, you know. Just I would just try to eat as clean as possible. So I basically got myself to the point where now I'm feeding myself. I'm eating a lot of nutritious foods. I'm eating high protein foods, and I'm doing my body good. I just don't understand that there's a balance. I'm like, oh, it has to be like this perfectly now. So if there was ever a period of, like, let's say there was something that I didn't have control over, that's where I would continue to struggle. If we had to go to, like, I remember like numerous times, like we had to go to the Mandarin, for example, like, there's a birthday and we got to go to the Mandarin buffet. So now we're at the Mandarin buffet and there's like clean food and there's dirty food. And it would be like something weird would happen where I would start just eating clean, like salads, but then I would eat something dirty and then I would just continue to eat dirtier. And it would be a progression of salad to like fish to like, now you're just eating like noodles and just going off the rails. So dessert at the end. And then I'd be like, oh no, like look what I did. Now I have to repeat that cycle. And that's where I get into trouble. So the one thing was when I started my contest preps, oh, easy. I didn't even think about cheating. When Vince told me, you're gonna have like a Reese's cup before the stage, I was like, oh my God, I don't even know if I can do that. But it was fine. It was fine because I knew it was all for a purpose and it all made sense because he was telling me like, this is what you have to do. This is what you have to do. And I was just like, yes, yes, yes. But then as soon as the show was done, he was like, okay, cool, enjoy some food. I didn't tell him what I'd never told anybody about my problem at the time. So he didn't know. So same thing. It's like, okay, now we're celebrating it at the buffet after the show. And I'm like, God damn, like I just ruined 4 months of progress. And that's what plagued me for about a decade.
Yeah. Wow. And you've talked a lot about your certain obsessive and addictive tendencies, and some of those, like, they're double-edged swords, right? They can help with aspects of bodybuilding. But what are some things you take away and carry with you from the bulimia experience to help you avoid not just slipping back into bulimia, but slipping into those states of the negative sides of addiction and obsession?
There's a lot of things that I do now. For example, I always have like a gratitude journal that I practice every day. I'll do meditation every day. Like in terms of like setting rules for myself, like there's certain things that I will not eat. And like for example, like I'm also celiac, so I just can't eat gluten, yeast, things like that. And like sometimes I slip up and do it, and then like now I have to deal with the consequences, right? But it's those things that setting rules for myself. I think also too, like I think I've just with the progression of my career, with the progression of just being wiser in general, I don't have that same like intense passion or desire for food anymore. Like I used to be obsessed about food. And I don't know, I'm not obsessed about food anymore. Like there's times where I think about it. But it's changed for me. It's just I don't know if that's just a maturing. I don't exactly know why. But I've definitely noticed that I don't have the same like intense passion for food. And maybe it's just because it's habits that have changed. Subtle habits. Like, for example, my first prep, a lot of the time on cardio, I would like spend time watching Food Network and stuff like that. And I would carry that habit throughout. But I don't watch anything food related. For the most part, I will watch like Gordon Ramsay because he's awesome. But I used to watch like diners, drive-ins, and dives. I used to watch like all the shows where you just see like the most delicious food constantly.
Yeah.
And again, I did that a little bit last prep, and it made me start thinking about food, and it was like hard to get out of that because once you start thinking about it, then the obsession comes back.
Yeah.
So I've realized, like, one thing that I've learned is that the obsession can carry into almost anything. You could obsess about bodybuilding, you could obsess about a person, you could obsess about negative things, you could obsess about a drug, because I've gone through all those phases too. And there's really nothing that in the end it's going to be like anything better than just if you can try to get a balance.
Yeah.
Because it's just extremes, man. Like that's the one thing, is like I'm too extreme.
Yeah. I think we all are to some degree. I can certainly relate to that.
Yeah.
And yeah, shifting topics a little bit, you talked about, growing up in Canada and the Canada bodybuilding scene. I actually
Yeah.
grew up, my family, my great grandfather bought like, uh, you know, 100 years ago, a plot of land on Lake Rosso, one of the Muskoka lakes, for like $100.
Wow.
So I grew up going to that cottage every summer, and I have very fond memories of
Oh,
Canada.
that's amazing. Yeah, that's right
Yeah,
near my cottage. Just a beautiful area.
yeah, yeah. We actually live next to the owner of TSN, I think.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, but no, we were like the poor ones compared
Yeah,
to
yeah.
everyone else. Very, very basic. Didn't have electricity for a long time. Didn't have internet. Didn't have TVs. But it was just so fun. It was kind of like a timeshare on my mom's side of the family. So cousins would
Yeah.
get it for a week. We'd get it for a week. But what do you think has changed in the last 10 years about the Canadian bodybuilding scene, and where do you think it's at now?
Oh yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, I've seen the progression. So in the beginning, there was a different system. There was a regional, a provincial, and a national tiered system. So there's three tiers essentially before earning a pro card. Now there's only two: the regional, national. So that changes things. Also, the divisions have changed, of course. Now, when I started competing in bodybuilding, there was just bodybuilding and figure, I'm pretty sure. And now, and also, what a lot of us did at the time was we did teen bodybuilding or junior bodybuilding. And that was always like, for the Canadian bodybuilders, I remember the junior Canadian nationals being some of the most exciting shows, at least for me. Obviously, competing in them, it was super exciting, but the lineups are really deep, because it was just essentially a bunch of guys like Ian Valier, Joe Seaman, myself, Dana Baker. I mean, the list goes on, but all these bright-eyed young Canadian bodybuilders with all the potential in the world, all competing together. And there was like 15 guys every year at the junior nationals, and it was always really, really fun. And that was my original goal. Once I got into it, I'm like, okay, well, now I got to win the junior nationals before I turn 21. And so all these guys were just showing up. I did that 4 years to win it. Show up, got third, show up again, got second, then I got fourth, and then I won it. And it was all the same guys every year. So it was really, really fun to keep hashing it out with these guys. And then that was almost like, okay, that's the badge of honor. Now we can like move into the open now.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did essentially. And yeah, so now I see classic being a lot more prominent. Of course, the other divisions, it's essentially what I see is there's more people in it, which is awesome. I love when more people are in it, in the sport bodybuilding. And because there's more divisions, then everybody feels like there's something for them, which is really, really cool. Bodybuilding in Canada itself, obviously it's thinned out the herd a little bit, because they're giving out more pro cards, not that many more, but before there was like one or two, and now there's probably like 5 or 10. So,
Okay.
with the Canadians not being that many to begin with, the actual competition at the national level is not as deep, in my opinion.
Okay.
I would like to see the top five at the nationals be a little deeper, like it was, because it was really exciting to always see that. But you see the same thing even in open bodybuilding now too, where a lot of the IFBB open shows, you're not getting like really deep lineups. When I did New York Pro in 2019, there was 21 guys, I'm pretty sure. And we just don't get lineups like that, in these
Yeah.
past couple of years. So things are changing, but I do believe that it is just because more guys are going to classic, guys going to physique, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. And what's your next goal, Robin? You're competing this year. What are you working towards?
It's gonna be the same as the last couple of years, where the goal is to compete at the Olympia. Except I'm confident that this year I will be competing at the 2024 Olympia on October 12th. So
Awesome.
we'll just be keeping that in mind as I go throughout my season, because obviously in that case the goal is to win a show. I'll be doing Toronto, I'll be doing Vancouver,
Okay.
and we'll see what happens from there, basically.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting this year. I was doing the math with someone on the guys who are still yet to qualify and the number of shows out there. It's going to be very, very competitive to get a slot in the Olympia this year with, Samson and Hadi taking some of the slots, and the Olympia being pushed up.
Yep. Well, I'm not worried about that, because I want it to be, like I said, I want it to be good top fives. I would like it to be really stacked top fives over the top twos or threes.
Yeah. What was your last prep like? Talk about some of the good and the bad, what lessons you learned.
Yeah. I had a lot of, like, the main bad was that I had ulcerative colitis during that prep, which was caused by a combination of oral steroids, also using like I told you, like yeast or gluten in my diet, things like this. Also other things that I didn't even really know about, like for example, chicken was on the allergy test, mustard, things like that, eggs. So all of those were insults to my gut. That, and then I had a bicep tear as well. It was a partial bicep tear that happened at 6 weeks out. And yeah, I was in the gym, I was trying to move machines around, tweaked it, and that's pretty much what happened. It's nothing really glamorous, and it really freaking sucked. I was super embarrassed about it, just because it's so stupid, right? Like whenever you hurt yourself, you're just like, how could I have hurt myself? Like, I don't understand how I could be this big and this strong and still hurt myself. But it's a reality check to be like, oh, wait a second, you're still, made of flesh. So
Yeah.
when you try to move, a ton of steel, and regardless if you're a 300 pound human being, steel versus tendon, the tendon doesn't really win that one. So I learned my lesson in terms of, like, just being more mindful. Like, again, it's like the too extreme, like just getting too hyped up for workouts. Like, I don't even listen to music anymore, because I'm like, I don't need the extra stimulation. I'm already like going so hard that I'm breaking myself. So
Yeah.
I should probably chill out a little bit. So things like that. And the good, what is good is, well, I had great condition. I had a really, really fun experience at the New York Pro and Toronto Pro. I learned a lot, so much about gut health. I feel like I'm an expert now, because I've read so many books, because I was so determined to get information, because nobody could help me. I talked to everybody that could potentially help me, and everybody told me just a bunch of bull crap. So thankfully, I found the medical medium. I found all his books, because they were recommended to me by my mother-in-law. And I read like 4 of his books, and I found a lot of the answers to what I needed. I was able to heal my gut. So that was a huge positive. Now I'm able to help other people. I don't really advertise as a gut health specialist, because I just think it's kind of silly to do that. I'm just a coach. I'm a bodybuilder, and we prioritize gut health in that regard. So there's that. And then also I've been working with Eric Seifert, who is an MAT master, muscle activation techniques. He's also a biomechanics specialist, and he's taught me a lot about just correct training principles. Not only that, but having the experience of continuing to train with my mentor BLP, because we've been training for a decade together, and he knows my body. So whenever something bad happens, now I think, well, what was the takeaway from this? And it was the fact that I was able to train my back without using my biceps. I couldn't even row. I couldn't do anything. So I just had to feel and work and do different things in order to, and I had to think about things a lot more. That was one thing. I wasn't able to just go in there and smash anymore. I had to always have like a solid plan. And I had to think that even if I wanted to do something, if it didn't feel right, I had to just not do it. And I had to do something else. And if that was whether I'm trying to train with someone and we had to go our separate ways or whatever the case is, I basically learned, and it's funny because it relates to, like, when people will say, listen to your gut. Well, that's intuition. So that's what I learned, is I learned how to use intuition really well, which is very, very crucial, I think, to bodybuilding, because you're a living, dynamic, constantly changing bag of chemistry, essentially. So we need to be always monitoring and having that observational aspect on ourselves, also having a coach. So we have to kind of coach ourselves while we have a coach.
Yeah.
And then that way we learn about who we are. And ultimately I think it comes down to like feeling how you want to feel. Because there's been so many ways that I've felt throughout my entire life that even if I was like, oh wow, this feels really good in the moment, it didn't feel good like in my gut, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Versus something that it might feel bad in the moment, but it's like, oh, this feels good for me somehow inside. Like, for example, doing like when you do like a really hard leg day and you're like, I'm gonna die, but then you have that little bit of a feeling of like, oh, I did something that was like hard, and like, it's that stuff. So essentially, like overcoming fear versus being put down by fear, like that's a huge component of how I can try to get myself to succeed. Not try to, but that's the integral part of success for me, is being able to decipher, like, am I avoiding this because I'm scared, or avoiding it because that's the gut telling me?
Yeah.
Which is not always easy. That's why you have to tune that skill, right?
Yeah.
Just like you tune your reps on a squat. If you want to be the best squatter, you squat every day. If you want to have the best intuition, you practice it every day. So that's probably the best thing I could have taken from that prep.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And I'm sure, like you mentioned, all those experiences really help others as well.
Yeah. But don't get me wrong, because during the time I was so down that every day I didn't even know if I'm like, you know what? Like, should I just end my career today? Like, my wife, she was like, she'd laugh now, but at the time, like every morning, I'm like, I think I'm done.
Wow.
Basically, because I'm like, I fucking tore my arm. Like, that's like one of my best body parts, but that's just how you feel in the moment. And I would just say, all right, well, let's just get through the day. What can I do today? And then I would say, basically just refer back to your team. Say, hey, am I improving? And if I was, then I would just keep going.
Yeah.
Because if there was a point where I was no longer improving, whether my health got worse, whether the bicep got worse, whether something got worse, and I would have had to shut it down, the fact that didn't happen made me able to do it. So that's what you have to do, is when something bad happens, it's like, what can I do? There's something that I can do right now. And so I basically just, I got a hold of my entire team. I was like, Dorian, what do I do? Eric, what do I do? Ben, what do I do? And I had to get more people. I started getting a therapist, and I started getting more people on my team because I needed more support.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I noticed in your post that I really like, sorry to interrupt, is you have this whole team and you tag them. You have, a mentor, a therapist, a coach. And I think it takes that to be successful in this sport. But when did you start taking that approach to like building out a team? And I really appreciate how you like publicly thank them and recognize them in your check-ins. What made that switch for you?
Basically, I mean, I've always been grateful, but I've never really understood what reciprocity meant until I met Robert Hutchinson, who is another one of my mentors. And he's essentially, he's a hypnotherapist. So hypnotherapy is something that I've been interested in because I did my thesis on it in my undergrad. And there wasn't a lot of research on it at the time, but now there's more and more research coming out on not only hypnosis, but hypnosis tying into meditation, being in the zone, and all these types of mind states. I like that because you can get into that versus getting into it with some other type of chemical. So this guy stepped in my life. he showed me that, yes, what your essentially what your theory was, because my theory was that hypnosis could improve sports performance, just didn't have any way of proving it. But then he did some of that stuff with me so I could be the subject, because before I was trying to get subjects and no one was really interested, but because I was the subject, he was able to show me that this is true, at least for me. But then the whole reciprocity thing was, if you give back to the people that take care of you, then they're going to keep taking care of you. And it's pretty simple, but it's very, very odd that in this industry, at least for me being a coach, when I work with somebody and let's say they don't want to give me credit, I feel like that's very strange.
Yeah.
So I felt like that for a long time, but I didn't understand why I was so bothered by it. So let's say, for example, I help someone who's, they're getting 5th place at a regional, and we worked together for a year, and now they got 2nd place at nationals and an overall title at a regional overall plus the 2nd place at nationals. The next year they turn around and they take all the credit, saying that someone, Robin didn't help me and things like this. I'm mind blown by that. I say, what's going on here? What did I do wrong? So I would be actually upset that maybe I wasn't a good coach, or I did something wrong, or I couldn't please this person. But what Robert taught me was that these people don't understand reciprocity, that you don't build a team if you don't give back to your team. Why would your team want to play for you if you're just a dictator and you take all the credit and you don't let anybody else get that shot or get that reward or be the MVP? So, everybody's got their own way to kind of market and strategize on that. But I feel like the more I can put those people in the highlight too, then if I become a star, then they get to be in the highlight reel too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really smart. And what has it been like working with Dorian, and how did you decide to work with him?
So, yeah, I love working with Dorian. I mean, I get to see Dorian at the gym pretty much every day. He does travel a lot and he's busy, so it's not often that we actually have a conversation, but I'll always see him and we'll always say something or whatever. But it's cool to have your coach in the same gym as you, first of all.
Yeah.
Now we've been working together since 2021. 2022 really, but end of 2021. So now he's learned my body, and it's taken us probably that amount of time, I would say, to actually get down the communication aspect of it. Because this is the way that it was, is that I've always worked with Benoit, and Benoit would just essentially have me coach myself, and then every week I'll just tell him what I'm doing, and he'll be like, oh, maybe you should change this by 10%, or just give me suggestions. And it's always kind of worked like that. And when I have had other coaches, and there's no need to get into specifics, but I've had over 12, and I have a list of them just because I was so curious. How many coaches have I had? I've had over 12 well-known coaches. They're all names in the industry. I've paid them all, and I've worked with all of them, and I've gotten all their information, which I think is awesome, because I'm happy to pay for all that information. That's why I invested in all of them, because I wanted to know. But the thing is that all of these guys are my way or the highway. And that was always conflicting for me, working with Ben and always having that dynamic conversation. It would be like I would get to a point where I knew there was something wrong and I would have to make a change. Examples. Let's say Coach A, I liked everything he was giving me, but he wants to give me aldactone. And I would just say, listen, like, I'm not going to take that. Say, oh, you got to take that. It's got to be my protocol, or no. It's like, sorry, dude, I guess we're not working together because I'm just not willing to do that. So, okay, cool. Coach B wants you to do X, Y, Z, and then just keep repeating that. So these guys, they just didn't like my style. With Dorian, it's cool because even though he's almost fired me a couple times for trying to do that, he understands that I think I know myself at this point. And he does admit that. And he says, yeah, okay, you know yourself. But you've got to, where we butt heads was the communication that I need to confirm with him first, which is pretty basic. But you will get clients often just, oh, well, I didn't want to reach out and bother you, so I did this. And so what do you want me to do now? It's like, well, you've already done the thing. So like, I don't care. Right. And that's essentially what Dorian said is, you know, we're willing to work together and we will work together, but you know, it has to be a communication aspect. So I think that's really what it is. Cause again, with all these coaches, it's just diet plans, it's just meal plans, but you have to work with somebody who is willing to work with you and like care and ask you the right questions and be there. Because if they're not present, then it doesn't even matter barely, you know. So I think presence is huge, and Dorian is good with presence. When he's there with you at the show, like you can feel him there, and he makes sure that you're taking care of at the show. Okay, get your tan now. This kind, because when you're a bodybuilder trying to chill out backstage, you don't want to be backstage worrying about other things. If you have someone there who's already thought of it for you, that's what Dorian does. He's very good at that. Not only that, but he's also very good at kind of like keeping me from like jumping ahead of myself. Like I'm like, okay, like I want to do like these 3 shows. He's like, okay, well, why don't we just focus on this one? Right? Because you get excited as you start looking good. You're like, oh, I think I could take on like so much more. Versus like when you're fat, you're like, I don't even know if I can compete this year, man. But now you get the momentum going and get ahead of yourself sometimes. So he's good at reeling me back in. But bottom line is Dorian's been around the industry for so long and he's coached Olympians. He knows how to get to the Olympia. He knows what it takes to compete at that level. And he's always learning. He's just like me, where he has other mentors and he works with lots of different people. And he's always getting more experience in that case. So that plus just he's super passionate about it, man. Like he's one of the most passionate guys I know in the sport. He's such a hardworking guy. I would say, yeah, the only downside is that he works so much that he's busy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So yeah,
He's got a lot going on.
Absolutely nothing negative I can say about the coaching relationship with Dorian. I would be thrilled if I could continue working with Dorian for the rest of my career. So that's where I stand with that, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And how has your approach to PEDs changed over the years? Who do you trust most for that information? And maybe what have you changed your mind about from talking to Kurt and others?
Usually, I feel like usually I can change other people's minds about things, but you know, there is a rare exception. With with Benoit, he taught me a lot about PEDs. You know, now I keep things pretty basic. Like I don't really use a lot of orals. I mostly just stick to like test, primo, stuff like that. You know, I'll use Strand for 8 weeks, maybe pre-contest, things like that. But I used to be way more obsessed about the drug aspect. Now it's like a running joke where I'm just like telling like my wife, I'm like, yeah, it's like a pain in the ass, you know, just to have to go through that process. But you know, I love it. It's just a pain in the ass. You know what I mean? So that's basically like what I have to say about that. Like with PEDs, I mean, I guess we'd have to get more specific because I could just ramble on about PEDs. But when it comes down to it, I mean, I just take what Dorian tells me to take. You know,
Yeah.
I don't muss or fuss about it too much because like I'm looking good, man. You know, and when you're looking good, you feel good. So then why do you have to change things? The only time I tell him is if I'm just not feeling good. I'm like, hey man, like we started something and like I'm just not feeling good. I don't know what it is. I'm just not feeling good. He's like, okay, stop this. Let me know how you feel in a few days. It's like, oh, I feel better now. Okay, it was that. That's pretty much as complex as it gets at this point.
Yeah. And how has your approach to training changed? Working directly. Eric is his name, the MAT expert.
Yep.
Yeah, I listened to your podcast with him. I thought it was excellent. What has he changed for you? And like in particular, why do you train with certain tempos and partials in your training?
Yeah. So with Eric, it's more focused on the biomechanics of the actual like the exercise itself. So let's say we're you know focusing on a hack squat and we want to target our quads. Then there's going to be one path of movement that we're going to move through versus someone who is taking a hack squat who wants to train something other than quads.
Mm.
Because the quads has one specific movement, the hack squat machine itself has a different movement pattern. The hack squat goes up and down on a slide, but the quads are going to be moving in knee flexion, which is actually a forward and backwards movement. So what Eric is essentially teaching us is it's the biomechanics of the movement versus what is the machine forcing us to do.
Yeah.
And so full range can be different for almost anybody depending on what you're trying to train. So again, like the example is going to be quads. If you put, Bob in a hack squat, he might have different ankle flexibility, limb length, things like that. He might not even be able to get good quad workout from a hack squat. So that's where you have Eric saying, okay, well, how are you built? This is how you should train that muscle then. Oh, how are you built? Okay, well, this is the exercise you should focus on. And like Eric is an example. He's extremely strong at almost anything. But if we do a hack squat, like he just looks so awkward in a hack squat. And some guys are like that. And you can improve the movement, but you have to be determined to do that, right? So when it comes down to training with partials, I mean, I don't even think that this stuff really needs an explanation, because if you understand training, the partial rep is still tension on the muscle.
Yeah.
So I just really like training intensely, and partials are part of that intensity.
Yeah.
So if I can do a full range, I will. And if I start to reach failure, I'll continue with partials if it's safe to do so, right? Like on a machine incline press, you can just keep doing partials until you literally can't even move the thing.
Yeah.
And I'll do that. It's awesome. It feels great. You wouldn't do that on a barbell row though. Mm-hmm. So it depends. Partials, it depends on the movement. Depends what you're trying to do. What's a good example? Maybe like on a leg extension, a lot of guys, they don't lock out all the way at the top. That's a partial movement. A lot of guys don't come all the way down and let their legs actually go, their feet come all the way underneath. So that's a partial movement. So we'll do the top, the very extreme top where you're squeezing and flexing, full lockout. And we'll do the stretch right after, completely underneath, and just half reps from the bottom. And then we'll do full reps afterwards. So it's basically like doing 21s for your quads. So it's just what it is. Same thing with tempos. You can do, okay, we're going to do 3 seconds down, 3 seconds up. Well, you usually will go, 3 seconds down, 1 second up. So the 3 seconds up makes things fire a lot differently. You're not able to just go and just whoop right by it. Now your muscle has to stabilize all the way through that movement. Try a 3 second tempo on a leg press. 3 down, 3 up. Like true 3, like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, and then up. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3, and just keep that going for 15 reps. You're going to want to speed up so badly.
Yeah.
Quads are going to be on fire. So it's on one hand, it's stress mitigation from the requirement to use more and more load increases the risk of injury and increases or decreases. Well, I guess it increases our sympathetic load. So it decreases our ability to recover. So that's why we need Eric to basically teach us how to use a weight that we can recover from optimally. Because if we're going in there and putting 15 plates on the leg press, then we're using way more load, but it doesn't guarantee that we're getting more tension on our quadriceps. But for sure, we're getting more sympathetic drive, which means it's going to be harder to recover from. So now, especially since we're in a contest prep, we have to manage that more. And again, it's like, if you get injured, then you don't train at all. So this is a game of getting into the gym and stimulating the muscle. That's the name of the game. If you can train 300 times a year versus your competition who trains harder than you, but he only trains 100 times because then he gets hurt and he can't train for another 100 days, you're going to win at the end of the year because you're going to be the more consistent guy. So it's about progressing. It's essentially, it's a progression that you can continue progressing basically forever. Whereas traditional progressive overload, you cannot continue progressing like that forever. It's impossible. You can do it for a while, but you're going to plateau. This is just anti-plateau training. A good trainer, you're going to have your style of training and you're going to train and you're going to think you need to add weights and do your progression. A good trainer will take you from that progression and then progress you on the things that you're weak on. So a lot of the times you're focusing on movement patterns that you're not doing when you're by yourself. And that's probably the best thing you can get from a trainer.
Makes total sense. Just two more questions, Robin, and really appreciate your time. I know we've been going for a while.
Oh, yeah, no worries. Really
enjoyed it. When do you think you'll be done with bodybuilding?
Yeah, I'm going to be done with it as soon as I can no longer compete at my best. Because I'm going to as long, like I said, as long as I can keep improving, then I will continue to do everything I need to do. It's easy in that case. That was the only time I struggled, was if I thought I could not progress anymore because of an injury, because of an illness, because of whatever. I know it's not the end anymore, but at some point there's going to be an end. You know, so until that happens, I'm going to do my very best until I'm forced to quit.
Yeah. What scares you the most about bodybuilding with regards to health?
I mean, nothing really scares me, to be honest, man. You know, I feel like if I was scared of the health repercussions, then I wouldn't have started in the first place.
Yeah.
You know, what does scare me more is doing this and not reaching my potential, or not giving my best, or to do this and just not have a positive impact on people. That would be more scary to me.
Yeah.
You know, because the thing is, like, if I worry about that, like, don't get me wrong, like, I do everything I can to make sure that I'm healthy. That's one of my obsessions, is like, because of bodybuilding and because of the damage that it causes, I'm trying to be as healthy as possible with my other habits and practices as much as possible to try to counterbalance that. But even if you do everything perfectly, you're not guaranteed tomorrow, whether you're a bodybuilder or whether you're not. And the thing that people should definitely remember is that bodybuilders don't die more than anybody else. We just get more of that media because we're in the industry.
Yeah.
And because that's where our minds live. But if we don't focus on that, then we're just back to health again. And then our jobs are basically just, we're supposed to back our health problems into a corner instead of our health problems backing us into a corner. And we do that with our daily choices. So if I ever feel scared about my health, I'm like, oh, there's a reminder to start working harder on backing those health problems into a corner. And so, you know, it's pretty obvious to figure out like what you need to do, because if you're a bodybuilder, you know that junk food isn't going to help you. An athlete only eats clean forever. If you're an athlete never ever eats junk food. They just don't, because there's no need for it. And it's not healthy. And athletes are always prioritizing health. So the other thing too is, now you have to do your cardio. You do your cardio, you do it all the time. And if you have any health, say cardiovascular health markers that are not ideal, you do more cardio and you lose body fat and you go back to your diet and you train, because that's all the things you have control over. And you take care of your gut health and all that stuff too, right? Like you basically do everything that you can. You focus on what you have control over, and you try not to focus so much on the things you don't have control over.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really well said. I think accepting a level of risk and doing your best within that to achieve your goals is really critical. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Robin. Really, really appreciate your time. Have really enjoyed the conversation and learning a bit more about you, and I'm sure the audience has as well. Where can folks find you online and follow along? And I'll have links in the description as well for everyone.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm always on Instagram, Strand Strong on Instagram. Robin Strand on YouTube. And then I'll be launching my website, Strand Strong Fitness, within the next week. And you'll be able to find me there as well, strandstrongfitness.com.
Okay.
But if you go on my Instagram, I have a link to my coaching. If anybody wants to message me there, I try to respond as quickly as possible. But yeah, man, I really appreciate you having me on. Had a really good chat, and would love to chat more in the future for sure, Scott.
Absolutely. And best of luck with your season. I'll be following along closely with your shows.
Thanks, man. Yeah, we'll stay in touch.
Thank you for listening to the show. You can find The Scott Mize Show on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Please leave a comment, like, review, or share the podcast with your friends or followers. It helps more people find the show.